I have actual evidence that rest did not destroy my career. I took a 12-month break after layoff, returned to the job market, and earned 55% more. And yet, every time I consider taking another break, my brain becomes a compound interest calculator. It's giving that math me. It's asking, but what happens to your investments, your earning potential, your learning curve? Apparently, one successful sabbatical was not enough evidence for my nervous system. She wants audited financial statement. She does. And I'm not mad at her because I started working at 14. I actually had two jobs and got laid off from one of them. I was the teenage evening secretary at a church rectory until somebody was like, the budget is not budgeting. Why are we paying this child to sit here at night? So my relationship with work began with a layoff, and my response was to keep working to figure it out. Then I completed my bachelor's and master's in one continuous 5-year program. No gap, no study abroad, and I worked every summer, so I was on campus the whole time. After graduating, I jumped right into work and I paid off more than $60,000 worth of student debt in 18 months. So when I was laid off about 6 years into my career, I realized maybe it's time for a break. I had not meaningfully stopped since I was 14. So I took a break. I watched television, cooked, gardened, worked out, wrote, traveled, spent time with people I loved. And I stayed connected and built some skills, but I did not optimize every waking hour for work. I was living my life and it was great. So if you're exhausted enough to want a break, but financially aware enough to be terrified of one, this video is for you because I don't think the answer is just rest. And I don't think it's keep working while your body files a complaint either. 3 questions can tell us whether a break creates freedom or delays it for you. So that's what we're talking about in this video. This question came up for me while reading Tiffany Cross's book, Love Me, because wrestling with what happens when you pour love, labor, and excellence into a career that does not pour back into you just stuck with me. She built a successful television career. Visible success, however, did not guarantee security. And after losing her show, she described needing space to heal before returning to the expectation that Black women keep pouring into everything and everybody else. She asked people not to mistake an out of office season for inactivity, right? And her story made me think about how suspicious we become of rest, especially when Black women are resting. If we are not visibly producing, people assume we are doing nothing, but sometimes you're not doing nothing. Sometimes you're trying to become a person again. Megan the Stallion talked about something similar on the Michelle Obama and Craig Robinson podcast, IMO. After losing her mother, she still had to keep becoming Megan the Stallion for everybody else. She described eventually pulling away from being seen and performing and slowly getting back to doing ordinary Megan things, not the public identity, but the person underneath it. So when I think about that, that is what my year off gave me. I wasn't a for the employee trying to prove the next thing. I was cooking, I was gardening, I was watching Next Level Chef. I was becoming familiar with the person underneath the productivity. But here is where it gets uncomfortable. Becoming a person again still costs money. It still costs money. And I've had several conversations that forced me to sit with that. One was with a friend between jobs. The other was with a mentor who returned from maternity leave earlier than she originally planned. And it was interesting because my friend who was between jobs, they had savings, right? So it's not like they were necessarily pressed for money, but they were seeing their bank account dwindle. Every bill that had to be paid, every time they went out, every little thing, see your bank account dwindling. Watching the balance fall changes how rest feels. A break may be financially possible while still feeling psychologically unsafe. My friend had a time on paper, but time on paper and watching your actual bank balance decline are two different experiences. Every month without having something coming in, every month without income makes the same expense feel super dangerous. She was feeling the weight of it. She was feeling the weight of, I love waking up at noon and going through my day, my activities, checking in on my friends and loved ones, having some protected time to work. But then when I start thinking about what is costing me, I start panicking. So I start looking for other things. And she just kept asking, when are we allowed to rest? And we have some thoughts, but the three questions that we kind of landed on that you need to answer are where we will go from there. Because the conversation made me realize that runway is not only a number, it's also your ability to tolerate watching that number change. Then I spoke to my mentor who had recently returned from maternity leave earlier than she initially planned. And her thought process was the longer she remained on partial pay, the less she could earn. And that often meant less money available to save and invest. And her goal is to be work optional. So if she wants to be work optional in her calculation, taking more time now might require her to remain in the workforce longer. Now, maternity leave and voluntary sabbatical are not the same thing. I'm not saying they are. I'm not collapsing them to the same thing. But what stayed with me was the equation underneath her decision. Rest now may delay freedom later. So where do we win? Tiffany Cross is asking what happens when the places we pour into begin to empty us. Megan is talking about needing enough space to become a person again. My friend is watching the runway get shorter, and my mentor is calculating what time away today could cost her future self. Even when we recognize the depletion, can we afford to stop pouring? If I keep working, I may postpone the life I want. If I stop working, I interrupt the earning and the compounding interest that could eventually buy that life. I don't think there's one answer for everybody, but I do think there are three questions that make the decision less emotional and more honest. Question one is, what is my runway? And this is not merely like how much is in my savings, how much is in my emergency fund. It's what does the break cost monthly? Every month I'm out of work, what does it cost? What expenses are coming seasonally? What amount must remain untouched for reentry? How much runway can you emotionally tolerate using? Those are big questions. That's the first bucket. The second bucket is, what is my route back? Which skills, evidence, and relationships remain active? How will you stay lightly connected without turning the break into unpaid full-time work? Because when I took my sabbatical, yes, I was going to the gym, I was gardening, cooking, watching TV, but, and this is one thing that I'll talk about in a later episode of the things that you can get when you are laid off. I had an outplacement service, meaning that my company that laid me off paid for a company to review my resume and also gave me credits. So I ended up taking a few courses around project management as well as AI. So when I went back in the workforce, I can say, oh, look, I'm a lifelong learner. One of the things that people really love in workers is learners and people who are curious. And I was able to show that, like, look, I was brushing up on my skills. I show you that I can learn, right? So the question of how will you stay lightly connected without turning the break into unpaid full-time work, which skill, evidence, and relationships remain active or real. Also, what conditions will signal that it's time to re-enter, right? Those, is it you feel better, you're in a good place? Is it monetary? What are the conditions? And the third bucket of questions is, what is staying costing me? Is another year buying savings, vesting, evidence, or a promotion? And all those are valid because all those buy you different things. Or is it consuming health, relationships, creativity, and the capacity to build another option? So it's helpful to name the asset and give it a review date. What do I need from this place? What is it giving me? And when do I need to review that I'm on the track to get that? Because we calculate the lost salary, the employer match, and compounded growth if we leave, but depletion compounds too, and we need to price both. And that took me a long time to realize, right? If you're burnt out, or if you're just over it, if you're not learning, if you are doing a lot of movement to shapeshift, that also compounds in ways that are not helpful. Tiffany Cross helped me name the depletion. Megan helped me recognize that doing less publicly may be how you return to yourself privately. My friend reminded me that a break can be affordable and still feel terrifying. My mentor forced me to confront the cost of taking that time. And that leaves me with the question, even when we know a place is emptying us, can we afford to stop pouring into it? And those are questions that I want to engage with in the chat because they're real and they're big and they're not one size fits all. Right. And my friend ended up getting another job. And in that, her criteria, and I talk about this in another video about finding your bright spots, her criteria was what what do I need to advance my own projects? Obviously, the monetary part was a big part of it, but then also how do I vet this job to make sure I have some flexibility, right? That was really important to her. Obviously, my mentor was important to come back so she can compound. And so all these, there's no right or wrong answer, but asking these questions really help. Let me know the questions you're asking. Let me know how you make decisions in the chat.